The dwelling carried the aroma of roasted poultry and freshly baked bread, the kind of fragrance that typically signified sanctuary to me, the kind that once convinced me that regardless of what transpired beyond these walls, this was where everything remained intact. That evening it carried no such comfort whatsoever. It felt orchestrated like a stage designed to appear recognizable, while something piercing lurked just beyond view. My mother Victoria's residence in Charleston, South Carolina was crowded in a manner it seldom was anymore. Collapsible chairs bordered the living room perimeter, outerwear draped across the staircase railing, and conversations overlapped in courteous spurts that never quite transformed into genuine amusement. Nearly 30 individuals occupied the space, relatives from both lineages, and a handful of Marlowe's future in-laws, all dressed somewhat more formally than typical for an ordinary family occasion. It was intended to be a pre-wedding gathering. Nothing ceremonial, merely an opportunity for everyone to occupy the same space before the significant occasion. I positioned myself near the kitchen counter, my spine resting against the cool surface of the granite, absorbing the clinking of dishware and the subdued murmur of dialogue. Someone was discussing highway congestion. Someone else was debating quietly about whether precipitation would arrive next weekend. Marlowe navigated through the space with the practiced expression she had been perfecting for months. The one that communicated she was thrilled and overwhelmed and exerting tremendous effort to conceal both emotions. Mother lingered near the dining surface, straightening napkins that were already perfectly aligned. Preston paced with a beverage in his grasp, nodding along to discussions without genuinely participating in them. I recall contemplating how peculiar it was that everything appeared correct. The residence was immaculate, the illumination warm, the meal nearly prepared. If I had entered from outside with no background, no recollection, I would have assumed this was a joyous occasion. I would not have recognized that my shoulders were rigid for reasons I could not entirely articulate, or that a quiet pressure had been accumulating behind my eyes since the instant I parked my vehicle on their street. I had arrived early to assist like I perpetually did. I chopped vegetables, transported platters, and refilled glasses. I maintained my usefulness because being useful had consistently been the safest method to exist within my family. If I remained occupied, nobody posed questions. If I remained helpful, nobody examined me too closely. I convinced myself this was merely an ingrained pattern, nothing beyond that. As you absorb this, I am curious what you are engaged in presently. Are you seated at your kitchen surface with a cup of coffee or folding garments, or traveling somewhere familiar on a tranquil road? For me, when all of this unfolded, I was standing precisely there by the kitchen counter, clutching a clean dish towel, experiencing that peculiar sensation of anticipation without comprehending what I was anticipating. My father Marcus's voice sliced through the space when he tapped his glass with a utensil. It was not loud, merely sufficient to capture attention. Conversations diminished in waves. The chairs shifted. Someone cleared their throat. I glanced upward, expecting him to announce dinner, or offer a toast about how proud he was of Marlowe. That would have been logical. That would have suited the evening. Father smiled, the rigid, courteous expression he employed when he believed he was being reasonable. He expressed gratitude to everyone for attending, for dedicating the time, and for supporting the family. He spoke about how essential it was to safeguard special moments, to maintain positivity, to do what was optimal for everyone involved. As he spoke, I sensed my stomach constrict, though I still did not comprehend why. Then he uttered my name, not gently, not kindly, merely my name, distinct and intentional, so that every countenance in the space turned toward me simultaneously. I recall the sudden warmth in my cheeks, the manner the dish towel slipped slightly in my grasp. Father stated that after considerable deliberation, he and Mother had reached a conclusion. He stated it was not effortless, but it was necessary. He stated that for the sake of harmony, for the sake of Marlowe's happiness, certain boundaries required establishment. He stated I would not be attending her wedding. For a moment, I genuinely believed I had misheard him. The words did not register immediately. They hovered in the atmosphere, disconnected from significance, like a sentence in an unfamiliar language. Father continued speaking, explaining, occupying the space before I could articulate anything. He stated I was not significant enough to be present. He stated my previous choices, particularly the dissolved engagement, had introduced excessive negativity. He stated weddings were about positive energy, about fresh beginnings, and my presence would merely remind people of what had gone awry before. He stated this was not punishment. He stated it was simply what was optimal for the family. The space went silent in a manner I had never experienced previously. Not the comfortable quiet of people listening, but a heavy vacuum where sound seemed reluctant to exist. Nobody laughed. Nobody objected. Nobody even shifted uncomfortably. I looked at Mother. She stared downward at the napkin in her hands, twisting it tighter and tighter until her knuckles went pale. She did not look upward. I looked at Marlo. She stood frozen near the entrance, her countenance drained of color, her eyes fixed on a spot on the floor just in front of her footwear. She did not meet my gaze. I looked at my aunts and uncles, at cousins I had matured with, at people who had embraced me hello less than an hour earlier. A few of them glanced away when they observed me looking. One woman compressed her lips together as if she might articulate something, then did not. Nobody inquired if I was well. Nobody stated this was unjust. Nobody stated Father was mistaken. My body responded before my mind comprehended. My heart commenced pounding so intensely I could perceive it in my throat. There was a faint ringing in my ears, like I had risen too rapidly. My hands felt strangely weightless, as if they no longer belonged to me. I waited for tears, for heat, for fury to explode from me the manner it does in films. None of that occurred. Instead, I felt hollow. Not numb precisely, but emptied out, as if something had finally surrendered after holding on for too long. Father finished speaking and took a sip of his beverage, satisfied, as though he had just explained a reasonable household regulation. The silence extended. It became unbearable. That was when I recognized something very simple and very distinct. Nobody in that space was going to speak for me. Not now. Not ever. I stepped away from the counter. The sound of my footwear against the hardwood floor seemed excessively loud, like a disruption. Every eye followed me as I moved into the center of the space. I could perceive my pulse in my temples, but my thoughts were steady in a manner they had never been previously. I reached into my pocket and retrieved my phone. I did not unlock it immediately. I merely held it in my hand, feeling its weight, grounding myself in something solid and real. I looked at Father first. He frowned, confused, as if he had not expected me to move at all. Then I looked at Mother, then at Marlo. Then one by one, I let my eyes pass over every person who had chosen silence. When I finally spoke, my voice was composed. It did not tremble. I did not elevate it. I did not rush. I articulated exactly 10 words. Who wants to inform her I financed the wedding? Nobody breathed. The atmosphere in the space transformed instantly, like a window had been thrown open in the middle of winter. Father's mouth opened slightly, then closed. Mother's head snapped upward, her eyes wide. Marlo looked at me, then genuinely looked at me, and I observed something flicker across her countenance that resembled fear considerably. Still nobody spoke. I stood there, phone in hand, surrounded by people who suddenly comprehended that this was not concluded. Not even remotely. The silence did not fracture immediately. It extended thick and uncomfortable until it felt like it was pressing against my chest. I could perceive small sounds I had never noticed previously. The low hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. The faint clink of someone setting a glass down too forcefully. The tick of the antique clock on the wall that Mother had insisted on keeping, even after it stopped matching the remainder of the residence. Father finally shifted his weight. His brows pulled together, not in guilt, but in irritation, like he was annoyed that the evening was no longer following the script he had composed in his mind. He released a short breath through his nose, the kind he employed when he believed someone was being theatrical. "That is not what we are discussing presently," he stated. His voice was sharper than before, edged with warning. I did not respond to him. I was still standing there, phone resting in my palm, my fingers wrapped around it slightly tighter than necessary. I recognized distantly that my hands were no longer trembling. My body had settled into something solid and grounded, like it finally comprehended what my mind had been attempting to accept for years. Mother took a small step toward me, then halted. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Serafina," she stated quietly, the manner she used to when I was a child, and she was attempting to calm a situation without actually taking sides. "You do not need to do this." "Do what precisely?" I thought, but I did not articulate it aloud. Do I need to stand here and absorb being erased? Do I need to smile and make everyone comfortable? Do I need to keep pretending that I am content with being treated like something disposable? Marlo finally lifted her head. Our eyes met for the first time since Father spoke. Her expression was tense, her lips pressed together, her hands clenched at her sides. She appeared frightened, but not for me. I could perceive it distinctly now. She was frightened of what might happen to her wedding, to her plans, to the picture she had constructed so carefully in her mind. "Serafina," she whispered, as if articulating my name softly might undo what had already been stated. I held her gaze. I wanted her to articulate something else. I wanted her to state that Father was mistaken, that this was cruel, that she would not accept a celebration constructed on my exclusion. She did not. Her eyes flickered past me toward Mother, toward Father, searching for direction. That was when it genuinely registered. This moment was not a misunderstanding. It was a choice. Someone near the sofa cleared their throat. Another person shifted in their chair. A few people commenced looking at their phones, suddenly very interested in their screens. The silence had become unbearable, so people attempted to escape it in small, cowardly methods. Father straightened his shoulders. He looked around the space, clearly attempting to regain control. He articulated something about not airing private matters in public. He articulated something about respect. He articulated something about how I was overreacting. The words washed over me without adhering. For the first time, I was not attempting to make sense of him. I was simply observing him. The manner you observe someone reveal who they have always been. My feelings to maintain the peace. How many holidays I had rearranged my plans to accommodate everyone else's comfort. How many apologies I had made for things that were never actually incorrect. I contemplated the younger version of myself, who believed that if I tried hard enough, if I stayed kind enough, if I proved my worth in quiet, useful methods, I would eventually be chosen. Standing there with nearly 30 people watching, I finally understood that moment was never arriving. Father took another step toward me. "Serafina, put the phone away," he stated, his voice low and firm, the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I met his eyes. There was no anger in me now. No need to argue, merely clarity. I recognized that whatever occurred next was already set in motion. The truth had been spoken aloud, and there was no folding it neatly back into silence. I glanced downward at my phone, not to make a call yet, but to remind myself that I was not trapped, that I had options, that I was not powerless in this space, regardless of how much Father wanted me to feel that manner. Around us, the residents felt different. The warmth had vanished. The atmosphere felt thin, exposed. People were beginning to comprehend that they were not merely witnesses to an awkward family moment. They were standing at the edge of something that was about to transform. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. I did not know precisely how the remainder of the evening would unfold. I did not know who would still be standing with me when it concluded. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was finished shrinking. I looked upward again, taking in the countenances around me, memorizing this moment. The discomfort, the fear, the sudden awareness that words carry consequences. Then I stopped speaking altogether. I did not explain myself. I did not defend my choices. I simply stood there, phone in hand, allowing the silence to do the work for me. That silence stayed with me as I drove home later that evening, sitting in the passenger seat of my own thoughts long after the residence lights faded in the rearview mirror. I did not activate the radio. I did not contact anyone. I merely let the quiet wrap around me because it felt familiar in a manner that was almost comforting. Silence has consistently been where I learned to survive. I was raised to be the one who understood, the one who adjusted, the one who smoothed things over before they turned sharp. As the eldest daughter, that role was not articulated aloud, but it was taught in 1,000 small methods. When my brother spilled something and cried, I was instructed to help clean it up. When Marlo became overwhelmed, I was reminded that I was strong enough for both of us. When Mother appeared tired, I stepped in. When Father was frustrated, I stayed out of the way. I learned early that harmony mattered more than honesty, and that keeping everyone else comfortable was the fastest method to earn affection. I did not question it for a lengthy period. It felt like responsibility. It felt like it was needed. And for years, I wore that role proudly, even when it carved into me in methods I did not know how to name yet. By the time I met Declan Ashford, I was already skilled at being agreeable. Declan entered my life quietly through mutual acquaintances with a smile that made people feel chosen. He was steady, reliable, the kind of man my family immediately approved of. He held doors open. He appeared on time. He spoke about the future in careful, practical terms. Father liked him immediately. Mother called him a blessing. When Declan proposed, everyone celebrated like a problem had finally been solved. I was in my late 20s, settled in my career, and apparently right on schedule. The ring was modest, tasteful, precisely the kind of ring people expected me to wear. I recall standing in Mother's kitchen while she cried happy tears and told me how proud she was. Father clapped Declan on the shoulder and joked about finally getting another son. Planning the wedding became a family project almost overnight. Guest lists were debated, venues were toured, colors were chosen. I smiled through all of it. Even when it felt like the wedding was happening around me instead of with me, I told myself that was normal, that this was merely how these things proceeded. It was only a few weeks before the wedding when the truth cracked through all that careful planning. I discovered the messages by accident, a name I did not recognize illuminating Declan's phone while he was in the shower. At first, I attempted to explain it away. I told myself not to snoop. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the words were too distinct, too familiar. The tone was intimate in a manner that left no room for doubt. My hands trembled as I scrolled, my stomach dropping lower with every line. There was no single dramatic confession, no obvious betrayal scene, merely a pattern of lies that had been quietly growing behind my back. When Declan emerged from the bathroom, towel around his waist, I was sitting on the edge of the bed holding his phone. He stopped short when he observed my countenance. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he attempted to explain. He stated it was complicated. He stated it did not mean anything. He stated I was blowing it out of proportion. I recall feeling strangely composed as I listened, like my body had already made a decision before my mind caught up. I told him the wedding was off. I articulated it plainly. Not as a threat, not as a test, merely as a fact. Declan stared at me like I had lost my mind. He asked me to reconsider. He reminded me how close the date was. He told me how embarrassed he would be. He told me how much money had already been spent. I told him I could not marry someone who lied to me. That was the entire explanation. Dissolving the engagement should have been the hardest portion. It was not. The hardest portion was telling my family. Mother cried, but not the manner I expected. She cried about the invitations that had already been mailed, about the deposits, about what people would articulate. She asked me why I could not merely work it out privately. She asked me why I needed to make it so public. Father was furious in a manner I had seldom witnessed. He paced the living space, his voice rising with every sentence. He spoke about commitment, about promises, about how relationships required compromise. He told me everyone made mistakes. He asked me if I genuinely believed starting over would be easier. I waited for someone to inquire how I felt. Nobody did. Relatives called with advice that sounded considerably like criticism. They told me marriage was not about happiness. They told me forgiveness was a virtue. They told me I was being dramatic, impulsive, selfish. A few people asked if I was certain, as if certainty was the problem. When I explained what Declan had done, the details seemed to slide right past them. It was as if his actions mattered less than my reaction. The betrayal became background noise while my decision took center stage. The wedding was officially canceled. Gifts were returned. Plans were unraveled. And somewhere in the middle of all that, a story began to form that had very little to do with what actually occurred. I was labeled difficult, emotional, unstable. People stated I had thrown everything away over nothing. Someone joked that I had cold feet. Another person stated I probably merely was not ready. Father articulated the words that stayed with me longer than any others. He stated I had ruined something beautiful. He stated if I had already broken one wedding, I should stay far away from the next one. He did not elevate his voice when he stated it. He stated it calmly, like a warning, like advice meant to help me avoid further damage. After that, things transformed in subtle methods. Invitations became fewer. Conversations shifted when I entered the space. When Marlo started dating seriously, there was an unspoken understanding that I was not to interfere, not to comment, not to bring my energy into it. I internalized all of it more profoundly than I recognized. I commenced believing that perhaps I had been mistaken. Perhaps I should have tried harder. That perhaps protecting myself had been a kind of failure. So when Marlo announced her engagement, I did not hesitate to offer assistance. I volunteered my time. I offered my resources. I stayed in the background and told myself that was where I belonged. I believed if I supported her sufficiently, if I proved I could be generous and invisible simultaneously, I might earn my way back into the family's good graces. I believed that by financing what I had once taken away, I could balance the scales. Standing in my driveway that evening, engine still running, I recognized how long I had been living with that belief that I owed something, that I needed to compensate for choosing myself. I turned off the vehicle and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, the weight of that recognition settling into me. I had spent years attempting to atone for a decision that had saved me, and somehow, without ever articulating it aloud, my family had taught me that this was the price of my freedom. That belief followed me into the years that came after. It settled into my routines, my decisions, the manner I measured my worth without recognizing I was doing it. I poured myself into work because work made sense. Work had regulations. Work rewarded effort. In the hospitality industry, there was no room for emotional guessing games. Either something ran smoothly or it did not. Either you appeared prepared or you did not. I learned to take comfort in that clarity. I moved up steadily, not because I pursued titles, but because I was dependable. I appeared early. I stayed late. I learned how to solve problems quietly before they became disasters. Eventually, I became an operations manager, overseeing multiple locations, juggling schedules, budgets, staff issues, supply shortages, and guest complaints with a composure that surprised even me. My income stabilized. My life simplified. I lived within my means, paid my bills on time, and saved carefully. There was no flash to it, no grand gestures, merely consistency. That consistency became portion of my identity. I was the reliable one, the one who could be counted on when things needed to get accomplished. And slowly, without anyone articulating it directly, that identity bled back into my role in the family. When Marlo called to tell me she was engaged, I felt a rush of complicated emotions all at once. I was happy for her genuinely. I loved my sister. But there was also a familiar tightening in my chest, a quiet warning I had learned not to ignore. Weddings did not belong to me anymore. They were spaces I had been gently but firmly pushed out of. Mother cried when she told me. Happy tears this time. She spoke about how beautiful the ring was, how kind Marlo's fiancé seemed, how everything felt correct. Father was more reserved, but I could perceive the relief in his voice when he spoke about it. Another chance. A clean slate. A wedding that would not be tainted by past mistakes. Nobody inquired how I felt about it. I did not expect them to. The conversation shifted quickly to logistics. Dates, venues, guest lists, cost. That was when Mother hesitated, then articulated what had clearly been rehearsed. She stated she and Father had been discussing. She stated weddings were expensive. She stated they were already stretched thin. Then she articulated it carefully, like she was asking a favor rather than delivering a judgment. She stated perhaps this was my chance to help, to make things correct, to contribute in a meaningful manner. Father did not soften it the same method. He stated I had already ruined one wedding. He stated this was an opportunity to balance things, to demonstrate support, to prove that I was not a bad omen. Those words landed quietly but heavily. I recall staring at my phone after the call ended. Sitting on my sofa, the afternoon light slanting through the window, I felt the old reflex activate immediately. The urge to repair, to smooth, to make myself useful. I told myself I was doing it for Marlo. And that was true, at least partly. I did want her to have a beautiful occasion. I wanted to be generous. I wanted to appear for her in the methods nobody had appeared for me. But there was another truth layered underneath that one. I wanted to prove something. I wanted to prove that I was not cursed, that my presence did not bring things crashing down, that I could touch a wedding without destroying it. So I stated yes. Once I stated yes, things moved quickly. Marlo was relieved. Mother was grateful. Father was satisfied in a manner that felt transactional rather than emotional. The unspoken agreement was distinct. I would contribute quietly and efficiently, and in return I would stay out of the spotlight. We met with Celeste Pemberton, the wedding planner Mother had researched extensively. Celeste was professional, organized and brisk in the manner of someone who had witnessed every possible wedding disaster and learned not to take any of it personally. She laid out options, timelines, contracts. She asked practical questions. She did not inquire about family dynamics. When it came time to sign paperwork, Celeste looked at me. She inquired whose name should go on the contracts. Mother glanced at Father. Father looked at me. It was assumed. I was the one financing. My name went on the line. I signed without hesitation. We toured venues together. Marlo and Mother and me. Magnolia Gardens estate stood out immediately. It was elegant without being showy. Set near the waterfront with tall windows that let in soft, natural light. Marlo loved it. Mother clasped her hands together and stated it felt correct. Father nodded, already calculating costs in his head. The deposit was substantial. I transferred the funds without comment. I booked catering. I financed the dress. Marlo fell in love with the one she stated made her feel like herself, but better. Each payment felt like another brick laid in a wall I was constructing around the idea that this time things would be different. As plans came together, my role remained distinct. I was involved but not visible. I attended meetings. I approved invoices. I solved problems behind the scenes. I did not offer opinions unless asked. I did not suggest changes unless something genuinely needed adjusting. I stayed careful. I stayed quiet sometimes in moments of honesty with myself. I wondered if I was being punished, or if I was volunteering for the role. The line blurred more than I liked to admit. There were small moments that should have warned me. Comments from relatives about how generous I was, followed by reminders to stay out of the way. Jokes about how fortunate Marlo was to have a sister like me, paired with sideways looks that suggested I was compensating for something. Once Mother articulated it outright, though she probably did not mean it to cut the manner it did. She told me it was good that I was contributing so much. She stated it demonstrated growth. It demonstrated accountability. I nodded and articulated nothing. The occasion I signed the final contract with Celeste stands out in my memory more distinctly than any other. I sat at a small table in her office, sunlight streaming through the window. Paperwork spread neatly in front of me. Celeste walked me through each page, explaining timelines, cancellation clauses, contingencies. As she spoke, I listened carefully, my professional instincts fully engaged. This was familiar territory. Contracts, responsibilities, clear expectations. I initialed where I was instructed. I signed where indicated. When it was completed, Celeste slid the folder toward me and smiled. She stated everything was set. She stated it was going to be a beautiful wedding. I recall holding the pen for a moment longer than necessary after she finished speaking. There was a strange sense of finality in that space, a feeling I could not quite place. I told myself it was merely nerves, merely the weight of responsibility. As I stood up to depart, I caught my reflection in the glass door. I appeared composed, capable, useful. I told myself that this was the role I was meant to play now. At least this time, I would not be the problem. I did not know then how fragile that belief was, or how quickly it would be tested. I did not know that by trying so hard to prove my worth, I had placed myself in a position where I would eventually have to choose between my dignity and my silence. All I knew in that moment was that I had accomplished what was asked of me. I had financed my way back into the story, and I hoped quietly and foolishly that it would be sufficient. The moment after I spoke, those 10 words did not explode the manner people imagine confrontation does. There was no shouting, no chaos, no dramatic reaction that made it effortless to decide who was correct and who was mistaken. Instead, the space filled with a silence so thick it felt deliberate, like everyone had silently agreed to cease moving simultaneously. I stayed where I was, standing near the center of the living space, my phone still resting in my hand. I did not look at it. I did not unlock it. I simply held it there, a quiet reminder of something nobody wanted to acknowledge aloud. I watched the people around me the manner you watch a slow-moving storm, not for lightning, but for signs of pressure constructing beneath the surface. Mother was the first one I looked at. She had lifted her head when I spoke, eyes wide for merely a second. Then she dropped her gaze again. Her fingers tightened around the cloth napkin until the fabric twisted and folded in on itself. She did not articulate my name. She did not articulate anything at all. Her silence was careful, almost practiced, as if she had learned over years that articulating nothing was safer than articulating the incorrect thing. Father stood rigid near the end of the table, his jaw clenched, the muscles in his countenance pulling tight as he stared at me. I could perceive he was holding something back, measuring his words, deciding whether to assert control or wait for the moment to pass. He did not appear surprised. If anything, he appeared inconvenienced, like I had disrupted a plan he assumed would proceed unchallenged. Marlo remained near the entrance, her arms hanging stiffly at her sides. She stared at the floor as though the hardwood held answers she could not face in my direction. I knew she comprehended precisely what I had articulated. She had watched me sign the checks. She had thanked me for the dress. She had embraced me after meetings with the planner. None of this was new information to her, and still she articulated nothing. I let my eyes move slowly across the space. My Aunt Rosalind sat on the edge of the sofa, her posture tense, hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked at me, then at Mother, then back at me again. Her lips parted slightly like she was about to speak, like she might articulate something simple and honest that could have shifted the balance of the space. Then Mother shook her head merely barely. The smallest movement almost invisible unless you were watching closely. Rosalind closed her mouth and looked down at her hands. That was the moment that injured the most. It was not Father declaring I did not belong. I had lived with his disapproval long enough to recognize it for what it was. It was not even Marlo staying silent, though that carved deeper than I expected. It was the collective decision made without discussion, that allowing this to happen was easier than halting it. Nobody challenged the idea that I was not significant enough. Nobody questioned why my past choices were still being employed against me. Nobody inquired why financing a wedding apparently did not earn a seat at it. The space accepted the story Father had told because it required nothing of them. I recognized then how often silence is mistaken for neutrality. How often people convince themselves they are not choosing sides when they absolutely are. Someone near the back of the space cleared their throat. Another person shifted their weight, the legs of a chair scraping softly against the floor. Small movements, quiet escapes. People looked at the food, at the walls, at anything but me. The discomfort was shared, but the responsibility was not. I felt something transform inside me, slow and steady. The sharp sting of humiliation commenced to dull, replaced by a strange clarity. This was not a misunderstanding that needed correcting. It was not a moment that would be smoothed over with the correct explanation. This was the natural result of years of being convenient. Father finally spoke again, though his voice was lower now, controlled. He stated we would discuss this later. He stated tonight was not the time. He stated we did not need to make a scene. The words were meant to put me back in my place, to suggest that my response was the problem, not the statement that had provoked it. I nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. I did not argue. I did not explain myself. There was nothing remaining to explain. Mother took a step toward me again, her expression tight with worry. She reached out as if to touch my arm, then hesitated, her hand falling back to her side. She appeared tired. Not sad for me, but tired of conflict, tired of disruption. I recognized that expression. I had worn it myself for years. Marlo finally lifted her head, her eyes meeting mine for the briefest moment. There was something in her expression then, something like guilt or fear, or perhaps both. She swallowed, as if she might articulate something, then looked away again. The moment passed. I took a slow breath. I felt grounded in a manner I had not expected. The space had revealed itself fully now. There were no more questions to pose, no more assumptions to make. What surprised me most was how composed I felt. For years, I had told myself that if I ever ceased trying to maintain the peace, everything would fall apart, that relationships would shatter, that I would be alone. Standing there, surrounded by people who had already chosen their comfort over my dignity, I recognized how little I actually had to lose. I did not move immediately. I did not rush toward the door or retreat back into the kitchen. I stayed where I was, allowing the silence to extend merely a little longer. I wanted everyone in that space to feel it, to sit with it, to comprehend that pretending nothing had occurred was no longer an option. Eventually, conversation commenced to stir again, hesitant and uneven. Someone inquired if dinner was ready. Someone else commented on the weather. The normal sounds of a family gathering attempted to reassert themselves, but they felt hollow now, disconnected from the truth that had merely been laid bare. I stepped back toward the wall, giving myself space. I leaned against it and watched, no longer participating, no longer performing. I noticed details I had overlooked previously. The manner Father's shoulders remained tense, the manner Mother kept glancing at me then away, the manner Marlo stayed close to her fiancé, as if proximity alone could protect her from consequences. I did not feel angry. I felt awake. That evening marked the first time I genuinely comprehended that being accepted had consistently come with conditions. That my role had been carefully shaped to serve everyone else's comfort, and that the moment I stepped outside of it, the illusion of belonging disappeared. As the evening dragged on, that recognition settled deeper into me. It was cold, yes, but it was also steady, distinct. I could feel a different kind of resolve taking shape, one that did not rely on approval or permission. By the time I reached for my coat, I was no longer grieving what I had lost. I was commencing to comprehend what I had gained. A composed, quiet certainty replaced the ache in my chest, and with it came the knowledge that whatever occurred next, I would not be shrinking myself to fit into a space that had already decided I did not belong. That clarity accomplished something unexpected. It steadied me. The noise of the space faded into the background, like static you cease noticing once you accept it is perpetually there. I could still observe everyone moving, speaking quietly again, pretending the moment had passed. But inside me, something had already shifted into place. I took one step away from the wall and looked down at the phone still resting in my hand. For a moment, I considered putting it back in my pocket. Not because I doubted myself, but because I knew precisely what was about to occur, and I wanted to be certain I was choosing it consciously. Not out of anger, not out of embarrassment, but out of self-respect. Father was articulating something to Mother in a low voice. I could observe his jaw working the manner it perpetually did when he felt challenged. Mother nodded along, her shoulders hunched slightly forward, already bracing for damage control. Marlo stood frozen near her fiancé, her eyes flickering between me and the entrance, like she was hoping someone else would step in and repair this. Nobody did. So, I unlocked my phone. The screen illuminated my countenance for a moment, casting a pale glow that felt almost intimate in the middle of that crowded space. My hands were steady as I scrolled to my contacts. I did not announce what I was doing. I did not elevate my voice. I simply turned slightly so everyone could observe my screen and tapped the name Gwendolyn Pierce. Gwendolyn was the venue manager at Magnolia Gardens Estate. We had spoken several times over the past months. She knew my voice. She knew my name. She knew the contract. I pressed the call button and then deliberately switched to the speaker. The ringing sound carved distinctly through the half-resumed chatter. Conversation halted again, heads turned. Even Father ceased mid-sentence. Gwendolyn answered on the third ring, her voice bright and professional. "Hello, Serafina," she stated, but because I wanted my voice to emerge, even. "Hello, Gwendolyn. I am calling to confirm the remaining balance and payment schedule for the wedding at Magnolia Gardens Estate." There was a brief pause on the line. The sound of typing. "Of course," she stated, "the final payment is scheduled for next week. Is everything satisfactory?" "Yes," I stated. "And I need to inform you that I will not be authorizing any further payments at this time." The space went still again, but this time the silence felt different. It was alert now. Charged. Gwendolyn hesitated merely a fraction of a second. "Understood," she stated carefully. "May I inquire the reason?" "You can note that the client is requesting to pause the contract." I stated, "Per the agreement, the account holder has the right to do so." Another pause. More typing. "Yes, Serafina," she stated. "That is correct. I will mark the contract as pending until further notice." "Thank you." I stated that is all I needed. I ended the call and let my arm fall back to my side. Nobody spoke. Mother stared at me like she had never observed me previously. Father took a sharp step forward, his countenance flushed. "Serafina," he stated, his voice low and urgent. "What are you doing?" I did not respond to him. Not yet. Instead, I scrolled again and tapped Celeste Pemberton. Celeste answered quickly, her tone brisk, but friendly. "Serafina." "Hello. I was merely about to email you about the seating chart." "Hello, Celeste," I stated. "I need to place all services on hold, effective immediately." The sound that emerged from Father then was somewhere between a scoff and a gasp. Mother reached for his arm, her eyes wide. Marlowe's countenance had gone pale. Celeste did not react emotionally. She never did. She posed the question she was trained to pose. "May I inquire what prompted the change?" I maintained my voice composed. "The contracts are under my name," I stated. "I am exercising my right to pause all planning and payments until further notice." There was the sound of papers shifting on Celeste's end. She took a breath. "Serafina," she stated slowly. "Legally, this is your call." Those words landed like a dropped glass. I felt them move through the space, transforming the temperature instantly. Father froze. Mother released a small, broken sound. Marlowe covered her mouth with her hand. Celeste continued, still professional. "I will notify the vendors and suspend all services connected to your account. If you decide to proceed later, we can discuss next steps." "Thank you," I stated. "I appreciate it." I ended the call. For a moment, nobody reacted at all. It was as if the space had forgotten how to respond. Then everything occurred simultaneously. Father elevated his voice, demanding to know what I believed I was doing, accusing me of embarrassing the family, of sabotaging Marlowe's future. Mother commenced crying, telling me to cease, to think, to calm down. Someone from the sofa whispered something under their breath. Marlowe took a step toward me, then halted, her hands trembling. I stood there and listened without interrupting. What struck me most in that moment was not the anger or the panic, but the sudden shift in how I was being perceived. Merely minutes earlier, I had been someone they felt comfortable excluding. Now I was someone they were afraid of upsetting. I had not elevated my voice. I had not insulted anyone. I had not articulated a single cruel thing. I had simply acted within my rights. Father pointed a finger at me, his countenance tight with fury. "You are making a tremendous mistake," he stated. "This is not how families handle problems." I looked at him calmly. "This is how contracts function," I stated. The space buzzed with nervous energy. People commenced speaking over each other. Questions flew. What about the deposits? What about the date? What about the guests? Nobody inquired how I felt. Nobody inquired why it had reached this point. They were too occupied scrambling to protect what they were about to lose. Mother grabbed my arm, her grip firm. "Please," she stated, her voice breaking. "Not like this." I gently pulled my arm free. "I am not yelling," I stated quietly. "I am not insulting anyone. I am simply choosing not to fund an event I am not welcome to attend." That sentence hung in the atmosphere. Undeniable. Marlo finally found her voice. "Serafina," she stated, her eyes wide with fear. "You cannot do this." I looked at her. Genuinely looked at her. I already did. The truth settled in slowly for everyone else. This was not a bluff. This was not an emotional outburst that could be soothed and redirected. This was a boundary distinctly drawn. The atmosphere in the space shifted from stunned silence to raw anxiety. People whispered. Phones emerged. Someone mentioned calling the venue directly. Someone else inquired if this could be repaired quietly. I articulated nothing more. I did not need to. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and took a step toward the door. Feeling lighter with each movement behind me, the space hummed with fear and confusion. The kind that arrives when people recognize the ground beneath them is not as solid as they believed. As I reached for my coat, I knew this occasion would be remembered differently by everyone who was there. For them, it was the moment everything commenced to fall apart. For me, it was the moment I ceased holding it together for everyone else. I opened the door and let the cool evening atmosphere wash over me, pausing merely long enough to breathe it in, steady and real. Behind me, the voices rose again, sharper now, edged with urgency. I stepped outside and closed the door gently, leaving the sound behind me, knowing that what I had accomplished could not be undone, and that the consequences were merely commencing to surface. The cold atmosphere struck my countenance like a reset. I stood on the porch for a moment, my hand still resting on the door handle, listening to the muffled chaos inside. Voices overlapped now, sharper and louder than previously. The composed silence I had created was gone, replaced by panic that spilled through the walls in uneven waves. I could perceive Father distinctly, even through the door. His voice carried when he was furious. It perpetually had. I did not move. I did not rush to my vehicle. I stood there and let myself breathe, steady and slow, grounding myself in the reality of what I had chosen. For the first time that evening, I felt fully present in my body, aware of my feet against the wood, the chill on my skin, the quiet strength settling into my chest. The door opened behind me. Father stepped out onto the porch, his countenance flushed, his eyes hard. He did not bother lowering his voice. He told me I was destroying Marlo's future. He stated I was selfish. He stated I was punishing everyone because I could not overcome my past. Each word landed heavy, meant to bruise, meant to push me back into the role I had perpetually played. I listened without interrupting. I had spent my entire life listening. Mother followed him out, tears streaming down her countenance, her hands trembling. She reached for me, then pulled back as if afraid of crossing another invisible line. She begged me to cease. She asked me to think about the guests, about the embarrassment, about what people would articulate. She continued repeating that this was not the time, not the place, not in front of everyone. Inside the residence, the voices of the Prescott family grew louder. I could perceive Sterling asking someone if the venue was genuinely canceled. Another voice inquired about the date, the schedule, the deposits. The questions arrived rapidly now, practical and urgent, stripped of any concern for feelings or fairness. This was no longer about family. It was about damage control. I stood there, hands at my sides. My posture relaxed in a manner that surprised even me. I did not explain myself. I did not justify my actions. I had learned long ago that explanations merely provided people more angles to argue from. The truth did not need defending. Father took a step closer to me. His finger pointed now, his jaw clenched tight. He told me I was being theatrical. He told me this was not how families handled conflict. He told me that whatever I believed I was proving, it was not worth the damage. I felt tired then. Not weak, merely tired of carrying everyone else's fear on my back. I stated I was departing. Mother cried harder. She inquired where I believed I was going. She stated we were family. She stated we needed to discuss this through. I told her we had discussed enough. I walked down the steps of the porch slowly, feeling every movement, every breath. Behind me, the voices rose again, overlapping and urgent. Father called my name. Mother called my name. Marlo called my name. None of them called it with concern. I reached my vehicle and unlocked it, the familiar sound grounding me. I slid into the driver's seat and closed the door, shutting out the noise completely. For a moment, I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Texts, missed calls, notifications stacking up faster than I could read them. I turned the phone face down on the passenger seat and started the engine. As I pulled away from the curb, I caught a glimpse of the residence in my side mirror. Lights blazing, shadows moving frantically behind the curtains. A family scrambling to regain control of a story that had slipped out of their hands. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel guilty. I felt distinct. Driving through the quiet streets, I replayed Marlo's question in my mind. What are you doing next? It struck me then how revealing it was. Not what are you feeling, not are you satisfactory, merely what arrives next in the plan. That was when I accepted something I had been avoiding for years. My sister was afraid of losing her wedding. She was not afraid of losing me. And once I comprehended that, there was no unseeing it. That recognition stayed with me long after the streetlights blurred past my windshield. I drove without a destination in mind, allowing muscle memory guide me through familiar roads. My thoughts quieter now, heavier, but more honest. The anger I expected never materialized. Instead, there was a profound sadness. Not sharp, not theatrical, merely steady and undeniable. At a red light, I rested my forehead briefly against the steering wheel and closed my eyes. I pictured Marlo as a little girl trailing behind me at the park, asking me to push her higher on the swing. I recalled how fiercely I had protected her back then, how natural it had felt. Somewhere along the way, that loyalty had become one-sided, and I had been too occupied being understanding to notice. My phone buzzed again, vibrating softly against the seat. I did not look. I already knew what it would be. Panic dressed up as concern, demands disguised as family duty. None of it would transform what had been articulated or what had not been articulated when it mattered most. When I finally pulled into an empty parking lot near the harbor, I turned off the engine and sat in the darkness. The quiet wrapped around me, not threatening, but solid. For the first time that evening, I let myself feel the full weight of it, the loss of an illusion. The conclusion of hoping that silence could ever mean affection. I recognized then that whatever arrived next would be difficult, but it would be honest. And honesty, even when it injures, is lighter to carry than pretending. I took a lengthy breath, lifted my head, and sat there until my hands ceased trembling. The panic had burned itself out behind me. What remained was resolve, composed and unmovable, waiting for the next step. That next step materialized quietly, not with another confrontation, but with the steady vibration of my phone on the kitchen counter the following morning. I had barely slept. I moved through my apartment on autopilot, making coffee, opening the blinds, admitting a gray South Carolina morning that matched how drained I felt. When I observed Father's name illuminate the screen, something in me did not flinch the manner it used to. I did not answer. The voicemail arrived first, then another call, then a text. His messages shifted tone with every attempt. At first he sounded firm, almost reasonable, telling me we needed to discuss like adults. Then, his words hardened. He stated I had crossed a line. He stated I was embarrassing the family. He stated I was placing Marlo in an impossible position. By late morning, the language transformed again. He stated I was going to regret this. He stated lawyers were already being discussed. He stated I had no legal standing to accomplish what I had accomplished. I read each message slowly, my coffee untouched beside me. What surprised me most was not the threat itself, but how familiar it felt. This was how control had perpetually appeared in my life, composed when I complied, harsh when I did not. Mother called next. Her voice was thin, exhausted, like she had been crying for hours. She inquired why I was doing this. She told me Father was furious. She told me I did not comprehend how serious this could become. She stated lawsuits destroy families as if the family had not already decided where I ranked. I listened. I did not interrupt. When she finally paused, waiting for me to soften, I told her I comprehended precisely how serious it was. Then I told her I had already scheduled a meeting with a lawyer. There was silence on the line. Not relief, not concern, merely shock. Mother had never imagined I would take that step. Neither had Father. Theodore Blackstone's office was downtown, in a building that smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. The kind of place that made things feel official the moment you walked in. Sitting in the waiting space, I felt a flicker of doubt for the first time. What if Father was correct? What if I had missed something? What if all those years of being told I was theatrical had finally made me reckless? Theodore greeted me with a firm handshake and led me into his office. He asked me to commence from the beginning. Not the evening of the confrontation, but years previously. The engagement I had concluded, the manner my family responded, the wedding planning, the contracts, the phone calls. I spoke for a lengthy time. Theodore listened without rushing me. He posed questions that made me think differently. Who signed the agreements? Who made the payments? Who was listed as the client? Each answer grounded me a little more. When I finished, he leaned back and took a breath. "Serafina," he stated, "you are legally protected here. The contracts are distinct. You are the sole account holder. You exercised a right explicitly written into the agreement." I asked him to articulate it again slower. He did. Nobody can compel you to fund a private event. Being related does not create financial obligation. Being excluded strengthens your position, not weakens it. I felt something in my chest loosen. A pressure I had carried without naming. He told me to maintain everything in writing, to cease engaging emotionally, to let him handle any further threats if they escalated. He told me that sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. Walking out of his office, I recognized how rare it was for someone to look at my situation without bias, without family history, without expectations, merely facts. That afternoon, the confirmations commenced materializing. Celeste Pemberton emailed first. Professional, polite, distinct. All planning services under my name had been formally suspended. No further coordination would take place without my authorization. Gwendolyn Pierce followed. Magnolia Gardens estate acknowledged the pause. No remaining balance would be processed. The venue was marked pending until further notice. I read each email twice, then once more, allowing the words sink in. There was something profoundly validating about observing it in writing. Not opinions, not feelings, confirmation. I forwarded everything to Father. His reply arrived quickly, furious and dismissive. He accused me of hiding behind paperwork. He stated legal tricks did not transform the fact that I was injuring my own family. He stated this was not concluded, but the threats had lost their weight. 2 days later, Father appeared at my apartment unannounced. He stood outside my door like he still had authority there. When I opened it, his expression was rigid, controlled, but his eyes betrayed uncertainty. He told me he had spoken to someone. He stated I was skating on thin ice. He stated judges do not look kindly on people who sabotage family events. I listened. Then I told him I had spoken to my lawyer. That was when his confidence cracked. He inquired who the lawyer was. He inquired what precisely had been articulated. He inquired if I was certain. The questions arrived rapidly, urgent, stripped of certainty. I told him the truth, that legally there was nothing he could accomplish, that I had acted within my rights, that if he continued threatening me, my lawyer would respond formally. For the first time in my life, Father did not argue back. He stood there silent, searching my countenance for the version of me who would eventually back down. She did not materialize. He departed without another word. That evening, I sat on my sofa with my phone face down beside me, the apartment quiet around me. I reread the emails again, not because I needed reassurance, but because I wanted to remember this feeling. For the first time, the truth did not depend on who spoke the loudest. For the first time, authority did not belong to the person who intimidated best. For the first time, I was not mistaken simply because someone older stated I was. The law did not care about Father's disappointment. The contracts did not recognize guilt. The facts stood where my family had not. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let that recognition settle into me. Whatever emotional fallout was still arriving, this portion was finished. For the first time in my life, the truth had my back. That quiet certainty followed me into the next few days. Even as everything else grew louder, the family group chat exploded less than an hour after Father departed my apartment. My phone illuminated again and again on the coffee table, the screen flashing with names and notifications I did not open immediately. I already knew the tone before I read a single word. I had matured fluent in it. When I finally picked up the phone that evening, I scrolled slowly, allowing the messages reveal themselves in order. The first ones arrived from relatives who had been in the space that evening. Short, sharp sentences, confused but accusatory. People inquiring what I believed I was doing. People stating this had gone too far. Someone wrote that family problems should stay private. Someone else stated I had humiliated Father in front of everyone. Then the messages shifted from confusion to judgment. An aunt stated I was being selfish. A cousin stated I was holding the wedding hostage. Someone wrote that I was punishing Marlo for mistakes that were already in the past. The words stacked on top of each other, forming a familiar story. Not what occurred, not what was articulated to me, merely how inconvenient my reaction had been. I noticed something then that made my chest tighten. Not a single message inquired how I was doing. Not one person stated they were sorry for what Father had articulated. Nobody questioned whether excluding me had been mistaken. The focus was unanimous and immediate. Repair this. Make it cease. Place things back the manner they were so everyone else could breathe again. I continued scrolling. Marlo finally spoke in the chat hours later. Her message was lengthy and emotional, full of exclamation points and frustration. She wrote that she was devastated, that she felt betrayed, that she never asked me to accomplish this, that I had ruined what was supposed to be the happiest time of her life. Reading her words injured in a quiet, dull manner, not because she was furious, but because she never once acknowledged why this had occurred. There was no mention of Father's announcement, no recognition of the humiliation, merely loss, framed entirely as hers. Father sent a message shortly after. It was brief. He stated he was disappointed in me. He stated he expected better. He stated that if I genuinely cared about family, I would reverse my decision and cease creating division. I stared at his message for a lengthy time. I did not reply. The next day, the private messages commenced. They arrived quietly, one by one, separate from the group chat. An older cousin I had perpetually liked told me she comprehended why I was injured. She stated she had wanted to articulate something that evening, but froze. Another relative wrote that Father had gone too far, but that confronting him would have caused chaos. Someone else admitted that they had perpetually believed I was treated unfairly, but that it was easier to stay out of it. Each message followed the same pattern: sympathy paired with distance, understanding paired with inaction. I read them all carefully. I did not respond to any of them. What struck me most was how relieved they sounded to be speaking privately, as if acknowledging the truth aloud, even in a text, was a risk they needed to manage carefully. Their honesty had limits. Their support arrived with conditions. By the third day, the group chat had turned ugly. Words like theatrical and vindictive materialized. Someone suggested I enjoyed playing the victim. Someone else implied that I was employing money to control people. I set the phone down and walked away from it. When I returned later that evening, there was a new message from Mother sent directly to me. It was short. She wrote that I did not need to win like this. I was supposed to gracefully lose for the sake of peace. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in my hands, and let myself feel it fully. That message clarified something I had never been able to articulate previously. My family was not searching for fairness. They were not interested in truth or accountability or repair. They wanted quiet. They wanted the appearance of harmony, even if it required someone else to swallow the damage. They wanted me to make myself small again, so everything could return to normal. I recognized then how often I had accomplished precisely that. Uncomfortable. How many times I had been praised for being mature, understanding, and easy. This time I accomplished nothing. I did not defend myself. I did not correct the narrative. I did not. Silence was no longer something that functioned against me. This time, it functioned for me. I muted the group chat. The phone felt lighter in my hand once the noise ceased. That evening, lying in bed, I contemplated the difference between peace and silence, about how often those two things are confused, particularly in families that fear conflict more than harm. I comprehended then that what they wanted was not resolution. It was a restoration of comfort, and for the first time, I knew I was not willing to pay that price anymore. I placed my phone on the nightstand, turned off the light, and let the quiet settle around me, steady and honest, knowing that whatever arrived next would have to exist without my compliance. Sleep did not arrive easily that evening. My mind continued replaying fragments of messages, not the harsh ones, but the softer ones, the ones that stated, "I comprehend," but the ones that stated, "You are correct, but please do not involve me." Those words lingered longer than the accusations, because they revealed something deeper. They demonstrated how many people had observed the imbalance all along, and chose comfort over courage. Sometime after midnight, I reached for my phone again. Not to respond, but to reread. I wanted to be certain I was not imagining it, that I was not twisting their words to justify my distance. But the pattern was unmistakable. Every message circled back to the same expectation that I should absorb the damage quietly, so everyone else could proceed untouched. The next morning, I woke to more notifications. I did not rush to check them. I showered, got dressed, and made breakfast. Simple routines that grounded me in the present. When I finally opened the group chat again, the tone had shifted once more. Now there were attempts at compromise, suggestions that perhaps father had spoken too harshly, but meant well. Perhaps I could attend the wedding after all if I apologized. Perhaps we could forget the money portion and focus on family. Reading those messages, I felt something unexpected. Not anger, but clarity. They were willing to rewrite the past as long as it meant they did not have to confront it. Father's words were being softened. My reaction was being reframed as excessive. The original harm was slowly being erased in favor of a version of events that felt easier to digest. I recognized then how often truth becomes negotiable when it threatens the structure people rely on. Another private message arrived from someone I had perpetually respected. She wrote that she admired my strength, that she wished she had accomplished something similar years ago. Then she added that she hoped I would eventually make peace because holding on to resentment merely injures yourself. I closed my eyes and took a breath. It was not resentment I was holding. It was a memory. I was not furious because I enjoyed it. I was distinct because I finally permitted myself to remember without edit, to remember how it felt to be blamed for being betrayed, to be labeled a problem for refusing to tolerate disrespect, to be excluded and then criticized for not accepting it gracefully. That afternoon, Mother attempted calling again. I let it ring. Not because I despised her, but because I knew the conversation would not be about me. It would be about smoothing things over, about convincing me to bend merely enough so the tension would ease. I was tired of bending. Later, I went for a lengthy walk through my neighborhood. The atmosphere was crisp, the kind that makes you feel awake in your bones. As I walked, I contemplated how often women are taught that peacekeeping is a virtue, even when it arrives at the cost of self-respect, how silence is praised as maturity, how endurance is mistaken for affection. I halted by the harbor and stood there for a while, watching the water move steadily forward, unbothered by the noise behind it. It struck me how natural it felt. Movement without apology, direction without explanation. When I returned home, my phone was quiet. The group chat had slowed. People had articulated what they needed to articulate. The storm had burned itself out. I did not feel the urge to respond. That was the moment I comprehended something fundamental about my family. They were not asking me to heal. They were asking me to disappear merely enough to restore their comfort. And this time, I chose not to. I placed my phone face down on the counter, poured myself a glass of water, and stood there in the quiet of my own space. There was sadness in that recognition, yes, but also relief because once you observe the pattern distinctly, you cease questioning your own reaction to it. I was not attempting to win. I was attempting to cease losing myself. As the evening settled in, I felt a composed resolve take hold. The noise would return. The pressure would arrive back in new forms. But I knew now what I was unwilling to trade away. My silence no longer surrendered. The wedding still occurred. I discovered that the manner most things seem to happen now. Quietly through a notification, I did not rush to open. A message from an aunt I had not heard from in weeks. She wrote that the date had stayed the same. The location had transformed. Everything had been scaled down. She added a heart emoji, then deleted it, then sent a new message that simply stated, "Hope you are doing satisfactory." I read it once and set my phone down. In the days leading up to it, I had imagined the wedding as a looming event, something heavy and unavoidable. I had believed it would feel like a countdown, each hour bringing a new wave of regret or grief. Instead, the days passed with surprising composure. I went to work. I answered emails. I cooked dinner. I slept through the evening. On the morning of the wedding, I woke up early without meaning to. The light through the window was soft and pale. For a moment, I lay still, listening to the quiet of my apartment. No rushing, no schedule, no obligation to be anywhere but where I was. I made coffee and stood by the window while it brewed, watching a neighbor walk her dog down the sidewalk. It felt like any other Saturday. That recognition settled gently without drama. Later that morning, my phone buzzed. A group message from relatives who were already there. Someone stated traffic was problematic. Someone else complained about the weather. Someone inquired if anyone had observed the florist yet. I muted the thread without opening it fully. I did not feel furious. I did not feel left out. I felt removed. Around midday, a photo arrived from a cousin. It displayed a small ceremony space, chairs arranged closely together, a simple arch, nothing extravagant. I noticed the absence of details I had once carefully selected, the upgraded seating, the customized lighting, the elements that had taken weeks of planning and coordination. I studied the photo for a few seconds, then locked my phone. I expected to feel something sharp then, a twist of pain, a sudden longing to be there, even after everything. Instead, what I felt was distance, like looking at a place I used to reside in, recognizing it without missing it. That afternoon, I ran errands. I picked up groceries. I halted at the hardware store for light bulbs. Ordinary things. Grounding things. At one point, while standing in line, I recognized how strange it was that I was not contemplating the ceremony at all. Not the vows, not the walk down the aisle, not whether Marlo was happy. It was not that I did not care about her. It was that I had ceased measuring my worth by my presence. In the late afternoon, another photo materialized. Marlo in her dress, smiling but tense, her shoulders raised slightly, the manner they do when she is overwhelmed. Father stood beside her in one shot, his expression stiff, performative. Mother was not smiling at all. I looked at the images without zooming in, without replaying them, without searching for myself in the margins. I did not respond. The ceremony occurred somewhere I was not, at a time I did not mark. I imagined there were words spoken about affection and commitment and family. I imagined people clapped. I imagined the cake was carved. I imagined laughter that sounded a little forced. None of it reached me. That evening I cooked dinner for myself. Something simple. Pasta with olive oil and garlic. I ate at the counter, scrolling through a book recommendation on my tablet. The sun dipped lower outside the window, painting the space in warm light. At some point, I recognized the wedding must be concluded. The thought arrived and departed without fanfare. A message materialized later from Mother. She wrote that everything had proceeded well. She stated Marlo was beautiful. She stated it was a shame things had turned out the manner they did. She did not inquire how I was. I read the message once and set the phone aside. I did not cry that evening. I did not pace the apartment or replay conversations. I did not imagine myself there, standing at the edge of the space, smiling politely, pretending nothing had occurred. I went to bed early. As I lay there in the darkness, I contemplated how many years I had believed that being excluded would break me, that missing a milestone would leave a permanent wound, that not appearing would somehow erase my place in the family. What I learned instead was quieter and more profound. The pain I had feared belonged to a version of myself who still believed sacrifice would be rewarded. That version of me had already departed. The next morning, I woke up to a few more photos. A group shot, a table with simple centerpieces, a cake that appeared hastily chosen. I scrolled past them without halting. I noticed something else then. There was no ache in my chest, no sinking feeling, no regret, merely space. I went for a walk that morning, the atmosphere cool and distinct. As I moved through the neighborhood, I contemplated the role I had played for most of my life. The one who adjusted, the one who covered gaps, the one who paid emotionally and otherwise so things could proceed smoothly. That role no longer suited. Standing at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to transform, I felt a sense of completion I had not expected. Not closure in the theatrical sense, merely an understanding that something had concluded naturally. Without needing my permission, I crossed the street and continued walking, my steps light, my thoughts steady. By the time I returned home, the wedding felt distant, already portion of the past, not something I had lost, but something I had stepped away from. And in that quiet recognition, I comprehended that I was no longer the person who had to sacrifice herself to maintain everyone else comfortable. That chapter of my life had closed gently but firmly, and I did not feel the need to reopen it. Months passed after the wedding, slipping by without ceremony, no dramatic fallout, no grand apologies, merely distance settling in layer by layer, like dust after a storm. At first I continued waiting for something. A call from Father admitting he had gone too far. A message from Mother acknowledging the injury. A longer note from Marlo that went beyond polite phrases and surface-level concern. None of it materialized. Father did not reach out again. Not once. No explanation, no apology, no attempt to reframe or justify what he had articulated that evening. He chose silence the manner he perpetually had when faced with something that challenged his authority. Pretend it never occurred. Proceed forward. Allow time accomplish the erasing. Mother called occasionally. Her voice was careful, measured, as if we were acquaintances navigating polite conversation instead of a mother and daughter carrying years of unspoken history. She inquired about my job, commented on the weather, mentioned a recipe she had attempted. She never brought up the wedding. She never inquired how that evening had affected me. It was as if the subject itself was too dangerous to touch, like acknowledging it might crack something she was not ready to face. Marlo sent a message once, a few weeks after the wedding. She wrote that married life was occupied, that she hoped I was doing well, that she missed how things used to be. I read it slowly, noticing what was absent. No accountability, no recognition of what had occurred, no curiosity about my feelings, merely nostalgia for a version of our relationship that required me to stay quiet and accommodating. I did not reply, and what surprised me was how natural that felt. I did not feel cruel. I did not feel guilty. I felt aligned. For years I had believed that maintaining connection required constant effort on my portion. That distance was something to fear. That silence meant abandonment. But now, silence felt different. It felt like space, like room to breathe. Without the constant tension of anticipating the next family interaction, my days settled into a calmer rhythm. I woke up without that familiar knot in my stomach. I ceased rehearsing conversations in my head. I ceased bracing myself for subtle criticism or disappointment disguised as concern. I focused on my work, on routines that grounded me, on relationships that did not require explanation or apology. I spent time with friends who listened without attempting to repair me, who did not ask me to soften my edges or dim my clarity for the sake of harmony. And slowly I commenced to comprehend something important. What I had accomplished was not an act of revenge. It was an act of refusal. People sometimes assume that withdrawing financial support was about punishment, that I wanted to injure my family the manner I had been injured, that I wanted to teach them a lesson. That was never my motivation. I did not take the money back to make anyone suffer. I took it back because I refused to be humiliated with my own generosity. Because I refused to bankroll an event where my presence was treated as unnecessary. Because I refused to fund my own exclusion and then be told I was theatrical for objecting to it. That distinction matters. For so long, my contributions had been welcomed only as long as they arrived without boundaries. My support was valued, but my voice was not. My presence was optional, but my resources were expected. That imbalance had existed for years, and I had participated in it because I believed affection meant endurance. That evening, standing in that crowded space, something fundamental shifted. I reflect on that moment often. The manner the space went silent after I spoke. The manner countenances froze, not in concern, but in shock, not because they suddenly comprehended my pain, but because the narrative they were comfortable with had been interrupted. I recall how my heart raced, how my body felt both exposed and grounded simultaneously. I recall the clarity that carved through the noise like a clean line, the comprehension that I would never again explain my worth to people who benefited from denying it. When I recall that moment now, it no longer injures. It feels clean. What I took back that evening was not merely money. It was consent. Consent to be treated as expendable. Consent to be the one who absorbs discomfort so others can remain comfortable. Consent to disappear quietly when my presence challenged the story. I ceased granting that consent. And with that decision arrived something unexpected. Freedom. Not the loud celebratory kind. Not the kind that demands applause, but the quiet freedom of alignment. Of knowing that my actions matched my values. Of no longer negotiating my dignity for the sake of belonging. I no longer attempted to earn acceptance by shrinking myself. I no longer apologized for setting boundaries. I no longer confused peace with silence. The distance that followed was not punishment. It was information. It demonstrated who valued comfort over fairness, who preferred smooth surfaces over honest conversation, who merely felt safe when I stayed within the role they assigned me, and it demonstrated who I had become. Someone who could sit with discomfort without rushing to repair it. Someone who could permit relationships to transform without chasing after their old shape. Someone who comprehended that integrity sometimes cost you proximity to people you once believed would perpetually be there. I do not know what the future holds for my family. Perhaps time will soften things. Perhaps it will not. I am no longer waiting for resolution to commence living fully. What I know is this. I am no longer the person who disappears to maintain everyone else comfortable. I am no longer willing to trade my self-respect for conditional affection. And I am no longer afraid of silence because silence when chosen is not absence. It is power. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this. Silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening.